between the goal line. Can you believe what you just saw?
These plays will go down as some of the most influential and impressive moments in collegiate sports. While entertaining millions of people and generating millions of dollars in profit, these star college athletes see little to no compensation for their abilities and talent. For the revenue being raised, college athletes only see compensation through scholarships in the hope of being picked up by a sports league. These athletes that generate massive amounts of revenue and attention for their universities should have the opportunities to sign sponsorships with brands or given monetary compensation. The very beginning of organized collegiate sport was born from a boat club formed at Yale University in 1843, and another at Harvard University 1 year later. Competitive rowing between the clubs occurred in 1852, which prompted other universities, such as Brown, to follow in their footsteps. In 1905 alone, it was found that there were over 18 deaths and 100 major injuries in collegiate football. President Roosevelt created the Intercollegiate Athletic Association, which was then renamed the National Collegiate Athletic Association, called NCAA, in 1910 to regulate college athletics for the safety and ethical treatment of student athletes. The National Collegiate Athletic Association was formed to implement safety measures in college when it was forbidden to recruit students based on athleticism and much less offer scholarships for their athletic ability. In the 1950s, the athletic scholarship was introduced to compensate for the institution's ticket revenue in athletics. During this time, the scholarships were used to avoid unionization, workers' compensation, and wages for the athletes, as they did not generate as much revenue as today. In our modern times, university television contracts generate profit, allowing the institutions to thrive in athletics. Colleges in the Big Six Conference combined billions of dollars in deals with ESPN and Fox, and coaches make six-figure salaries. There is this strange acceptance for this while student inventors, such as the founders of Google, are compensated for their inventions. Why should a student athlete be penalized? Does this violate sports ethics? The NCAA was formed over a decade ago when college athletics made little revenue for their universities. As college athletics have been on the incline since then and generating billions for contracts, compensation is only ethical and an incentive for better performance.
So as Lexi just got done talking about the background and history of college athletics, I'll be talking about the current landscape of it. So to begin, powerful university leaders, student-athlete advocates, and the NCAA are intensifying pressure on lawmakers to quickly settle how college players should be paid. Meanwhile, the NCAA makes a whopping $1 billion in revenue that's largely shared with schools. It hinted at lobbying blitz among states to stop patchwork laws from governing how college players can profit off their so-called names, images, and likeliness. This allows the NCAA to keep more money, but more importantly, more control. A recent example that we found was with New Jersey. With New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy, he recently signed into law the New Jersey Fair Play Act, making New Jersey the 5th U.S. state, following California, Colorado, Florida, and Nebraska, to enact such legislation that allows student athletes to receive compensation for their commercial use of their name, image, and likeliness, NIL, without jeopardizing the NCAA eligibility. It is highly unlikely that any of these state legislators would admit to passing NIL laws with the intent to provide a competitive advantage to his or her state's universities, but it's also undeniable that the potential for athletes to profit from the commercial use of their NIL could provide a massive recruiting windfall for schools and the states. A great example that we found was with a football player at the University of Michigan who would theoretically have his earnings potentially capped at the moment of grant-in aid he receives from the university. Whereas at Rutgers, that same player might receive both grant-in aid and additional income in the form of fair market value and endorsement deals with a local restaurant chain, for example. While a recruit may weigh in a multitude of factors in selecting a school, the opportunity to earn substantial endorsement income could tip the scales in favor of schools located in states where collegiate athletes can monetize their NIL rights, which would make a huge unfair playing field. The potential for competitive imbalance could explain why more than 30 states have either introduced legislation regarding NIL rights or have publicly announced their intention to do so. Given the substantive uniformity of the laws passed so far, early adoption may be what gives a state a competitive edge. The sooner a state's NIL laws become more operative, the likelier it is that school states could reap a recruiting advantage. The NCAA is pushing hard against these changes, but with more and more states passing these laws and following suit, it can only be a matter of time before things change. With the current landscape changing, we are seeing more and more states follow with these changing their laws. During our research and data, we found a lot of information that supported college athletes to get compensated or endorsed in some sort of way. Dan and Kyle will be up next to talk about why they should be able to get compensated.
Thanks, Sebastian. So, why should colleges have the ability to gain further compensation? Thoughts regarding the subject usually revolve around the fact that players are getting paid tuition to attend the college and get the privilege of recognition for the sport. But when comparing the athlete's compensation to how much the college is gaining, there is a stark difference. As discussed earlier, we learned how much colleges make off of television rights alone. But what about the free education? That should be fair enough, right? Not every athlete is even getting a full scholarship. As stated by the NCAA themselves, they say only about 2% of high school athletes are awarded athletic scholarships to compete in college. Of the student athletes participating in sports with professional leagues, very few become professional athletes. College education is the most rewarding benefit of the student athlete experience. So, we hear from the statement that 1, a low percentage is even awarded scholarships for compensation, and 2, the education is what should be most rewarding in case they don't make it to the pros. But let's see if this is really true. A research study was published by the Journal of Sports Management in 2010 discussing the graduation rates of college athletes. This study focused on showing how the NCAA skews its graduation success of student athletes. Rather than focusing on their data solely on full-time student athletes and separating them by category of the sport, they lump everyone together. Doesn't matter what category of sport or gender you are in. The statistics are based on all Division I sports, male and female, and include students who had go to part-time to maintain the workload. So it's not even if you're like full-time or not. This helps boost the graduation success even though the period of graduation is extended for some players, or even if some players drop out and go unnoted because of their part-time status. This also brings time to attention. Players play the game, they have to practice, they have to go to class, they have to study for exams, and even more is expected from the players on title level teams as far as personal workouts, meeting, and film study, sometimes at outrageous hours. Not to mention travel. Where does all this time go? How do they fit it in their schedule? When we look back to the NCAA wanting to prioritize education and the athlete has to complete all these tasks listed, it seems questionable. We also see the NCAA including their graduation rates with all athletes, even if they are not title level, or even if they're not on an athletic scholarship, to make it seem that the college athletes are performing just as high as their non-athlete peers. If education was truly the priority, there would be more options for a larger percentage of students to receive scholarships, have more time to focus on their studies, and have more transparent data on the graduation rates. Education is not compensation enough when the athletes are giving so much of themselves to all the training, games, travel, and more. Meanwhile, not even having enough time to effectively study and achieve the academic excellence they might want because they're putting so much time and energy just in the sport. This falsehood of putting education first as a support for not allowing athletes to get paid or sponsored just doesn't make sense, and it isn't fair to the students who bring all that revenue in to the schools.
As time goes on, everything is subject to changes, both big and small. Every team, every division, every sport, and every industry all have the same potential of starting the next business day by experiencing a major change that will forever shred the old norms of the past and establish new norms for decades of the future to come. In 1936, the NFL became the first major sport to introduce the concept of a draft into their league, forever changing the way that players would make it to the professional leagues through either the collegiate or high school level. In 1947, Jackie Robinson shredded the color barrier and became the first African American to play Major League Baseball, a sport that was severely segregated for nearly 50 years prior to that point in time. In 1974, the first Tommy John surgery, named after the baseball pitcher that it was performed on, was carried out and successful, providing a solution that made a career-ending injury for Major League Baseball players one that only required 1 year of rest before they could resume their playing careers. Now, 61 years after the establishment of the athletic scholarship, it is time for athletes themselves to be able to financially benefit through endorsements as a result of their performance in college sports. If the player provides the talent, then they should be able to reap the benefits of their performance. Thank you very much for listening.